And now it is my great pleasure to introduce my colleague Alanna Powers-O'Brien, FOSI's Research and Program Specialist, and Gina Bell, Youth Partner with InTandem, to launch our latest research report. Please welcome them.
Hi, good morning, everyone. We are so excited to kick off today's programming with a presentation on our new research report titled Generative AI in Uncertain Times, How Teens Are Navigating a New Digital Frontier. Can we cue the slides, please? Thank you so much. So to quickly introduce ourselves, my name is Alanna Powers-O'Brien, and I am the research specialist at FOSI and the author of this report, and I'll turn it over to Gina.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gina Bell. I'm a first-year college student, and I participated in the survey results reflection session for this research. I'm a youth partner at InTandem, which is an organization dedicated to including youth perspectives in research and product development.
Awesome, thank you, Gina, and we will go into what one of Gina's sessions entailed in just a minute. So I want to briefly go through this presentation outline. So here's what we'll talk about today. First, we'll talk about our objectives of this research. Then we'll go over some high-level methods. We'll present some top-level findings, and we'll wrap up with some implications. And Gina is here on stage with me today to provide perspective, not only as a young person who uses Gen AI, but also as somebody who actually participated in this research. So to talk about objectives. When we set out to do this project at the beginning of 2025, it was really easy to land on the topic of generative AI. Discussions about Gen AI are everywhere, as we've already seen this morning, and it seems like every week there's a new tool, there's a new update, and there's some breaking news story about this technology. A lot of talk about generative AI has been directed towards teenagers. So this research set out to speak to teenagers themselves to understand how they use this technology and how they feel about this technology. We ended up focusing on 4 categories: use purposes, concerns and benefits, responsibility, and companionship. I will briefly go into some methods now. So we conducted this research in 2 phases. We did 4 focus groups with teen generative AI users, followed by a survey with 1,000 teen respondents. Survey respondents had used generative AI within the last 6 months. We also focused on youth-engaged design, so we held reflection sessions throughout the research process, namely right before we did the survey and also when we analyzed the survey findings and the focus group findings. So Gina was actually part of one of these reflection groups. Gina, do you want to say a few words about that experience?
Yeah, being a part of the reflection group was really interesting. I liked how we got to share our honest opinion on Gen AI. It didn't just feel like research to me. It felt like we were helping shape the questions and ideas.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So before we move on, I want to note a few additional things. So all of this data was collected in the United States, and all participants were between the ages of 15 and 18, meaning that this study focused on older teens. So when I say teens throughout this presentation and also throughout the report many of you have now, I'm referring to teens who are 15 to 18 years old who have used generative AI in the past. So now we'll get into some findings. So our first finding, nearly half, or 45%, of survey respondents use generative AI more than once a week. While that is a relatively big number, it's important to note that only 13% of teens report using generative AI daily, and nearly a quarter claim to use generative AI once a month or less. Does this align with what you've seen, Gina?
I feel like how much you use it really depends on your academic standing. As a college student, I find myself using AI more than what I would use it for back in high school. I feel this way because AI policies, especially in the school systems, I feel as though they're embracing the change.
Yeah, so schools are starting to embrace AI a little bit more. That's really interesting. So our next finding here is talking about what are teens using generative AI for? Well, we see a really clear front runner here, and that's academic work, such as brainstorming, proofreading, or researching. The second most popular use is as a search engine for non-academic tasks, meaning a place to ask questions about interest and curiosity, likely similar to how a lot of us use Google. And then the third most popular use was entertainment. Teens in the focus group spoke about having generative AI create stories or generate images or make songs. One focus group participant actually told me that her and her friends will use Gen AI to make Love Island episodes and that they're actually pretty good. After that, use drops off a bit, as we can see, with under a quarter of teens saying that they use generative AI for their jobs or internships, for their physical health, their mental health, or for social connection. But I want to put a pin in that mental health stat, though, because we're going to come back to it a little bit later. But Gina, actually, you wanted to talk about Gen AI and how you've used it for your mental health.
I used to talk about AI, how I was feeling one day. I did feel as though it was better than a human connection, only because the AI said everything right when comforting me. It's like when you're talking to someone and they add a why onto why it happened, or a but instead of listening to you. Whereas the AI would comfort you even if you're wrong in the moment.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. So we were also interested in what teens are concerned about. And the concern selected most out of this list was loss of critical thinking skills, as Stephen mentioned in his opening remarks as well. This aligns well with teens' primary use of generative AI for academics. But it is worth pointing out that concerns were pretty evenly distributed among these categories here. And I also want to note that only 7% of teens say that they have no concerns. So how are you feeling about these findings, Gina?
Though the results were everywhere, I couldn't help but agree with the leading poll. I feel like now, instead of AI, like using AI for an idea or brainstorm, students are utilizing AI for their whole assignment. I know a few people that can't even start a thesis statement without using AI.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. So we also wanted to talk about benefits. So teens' perceived benefits of generative AI paint a bit of a clearer picture than the concerns did. Speed and convenience were clearly the top benefits for teens, with 30% selecting convenience and 18% selecting speed. In the focus groups, a lot of participants spoke about ease. It's easy to use, it's easy to access, and it can easily generate information that could take a lot longer to find somewhere else. So a smaller share of teens' top benefits was a lack of judgment and also sparking inspiration. And I also want to note here that only 5% of teens said that there were no benefits about generative AI. So Gina, you actually said this graph was pretty similar to your experience. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the results didn't surprise me at all. Most of all teens, such as myself, we own phones and other devices where we can have a wide variety of resources, and AI is one of them. AI can make graphs for an assignment and citations.
Yeah, so it's a tool in the toolbox. Yeah, right. That's great. Awesome. Yeah, so our next slide is talking about who is responsible for teaching teens about generative AI. Obviously, there's a lot of reporting from adults about their concerns and hopes for teens when it comes to this technology. However, when it comes to who teens think should be teaching them about Gen AI, many are not thinking about adults first and foremost. Instead, about 3 in 10 see themselves as most responsible for teaching themselves about generative AI, and another 17% say their friends and peers are mainly responsible. If teens do turn to an adult, 16% think that their teachers are most responsible. And then you see parents are much closer to the bottom here, with just 8% of teens saying their parents are most responsible for teaching them about generative AI. Similarly, 57% of teens say their parents do not have rules about generative AI. Only 30% of teens claim that their parents do have these rules in place. And most focus group and reflection session participants just didn't see their parents as playing a very active role in their generative AI rule enforcement or education because they just felt they knew a lot more than their parents and caregivers did about this technology. Also, a lot of teens really strongly tie generative AI to academics, so they may just view their teachers in the school system as an easier place for them to go for help and rules and guidance than their parents themselves. Gina, do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey with rules and teaching?
When I first used AI, I kind of had to teach myself how to use it, especially on assignments. At first, it was simple things such as taking the dashes out of an answer or lowering the vocabulary, or asking AI to sound human. But then it had gotten a bit easier once schools added AI policy. For example, my school, if you have a 20% and above AI-generated answer, that response is an automatic fail.
Yeah, so those rules provided some structure, which was helpful, which I think is really cool to see too. Yeah. So our next stat here is, remember when I asked you to put a pin in the discussion about mental health? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that now. If you'll recall, when we asked respondents if they used generative AI for mental health, only about 2 in 10 said yes. However, when we asked this question in a broader way, have you ever talked about your feelings with a generative AI chatbot? The affirmative answers literally doubled, and 42% of teens said that they have talked about their feelings with a chatbot. Another 20% haven't, but they know somebody who has. And then basically the same number of teens also said that talking to generative AI feels like talking to a human. So focus group participants spoke about generative AI as an objective voice, a second point of view that would not judge them, while also emphasizing the accessibility of these tools when compared to other outlets like therapy. And other participants, though, they weren't really keen on this idea. They actually thought of this as pretty exploitative practice that made them feel upset on behalf of others who may be using these tools this way. And Gina, how do you feel about this?
Honestly, after comparing a human response to an AI response, I realized how easy it is to confuse an AI tone with real empathy. If people started to use AI for emotional support to feel safe, that might stop them from going to an actual person and receiving the help they need. I think it's very tricky when a tech company designs tools that mean care but isn't capable of caring.
Yeah, and I think that care point is really, really important. So with all of this going on, 4 in 10 teens finding generative AI to be human-like, and the same amount claiming to talk about their feelings with a generative AI, we wanted to get an idea of how teens felt, how safe teens felt when using these tools. So 3 in 5 teens feel safe when using generative AI, and only 12% said they feel unsafe. And then we have this remaining 29% who are saying they feel neither safe nor unsafe. This was very interesting to us because that's a pretty high number in a neutral zone. So when we asked our reflection session participants, including Gina, about this stat, they told us that they aren't really considering safety when they're using these tools. To them, it's a tool in the toolbox, as I mentioned earlier, that helps them in certain areas of their lives. It's also been around for nearly 3 years, which to adults can maybe seem like the blink of an eye, but that's a long time for teens. And during that time, generative AI has become integrated into their lives in some way. It's not safe or unsafe, it just is. And Gina, do you want to speak to that sentiment a little bit?
I stand in the middle as well, only because there are many takeaways on both sides. For example, unsafe because if you log in, it actually saves your data, and the first thing that comes to my mind would be data leaks. Safe because most AI bots save the interactions to improve the future model, meaning our message to the AI might be stored to improve the model for future generations.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. So here's our last stat here. We asked teens if they thought they should be involved in the design of generative AI tools. Over half said yes, and only 17% said no. In the focus groups, when we asked about the involvement of young people, we got 2 types of answers. Some teens spoke about involvement from a trust and safety perspective, so shaping generative AI tools to be a more inclusive, safe space. But other teens were more interested in playing a role in the engineering or technology perspective, so providing guidance on updates or programming models, things like that. Gina, where do you stand here?
In my opinion, I feel like youth involvement is needed because we are the future just as much as AI. The world is constantly changing and technology is changing with it. If we aren't a part of the conversation, AI might not reflect the needs of the next generation.
Yeah, I just want to repeat something she just said there. We are the future just as much as AI. I think that should be something we all take away from today. So to wrap our findings section, I thought we would both just read out a quote from this list here. There's plenty of more quotes in the report itself, and they're all on the screen for you to read as well. But I will start by quoting a 16-year-old boy in one of our focus groups. My friend usually talks to me about he doesn't feel confident enough to talk to his teacher, so he just uses his AI and does work so he can get a grade and move on in life. And Gina, I'll turn it over to you.
My quote is from a 17-year-old girl. I feel like AI is a good way to double check your homework before you turn it in, especially in a world where we value our grades so much.
Perfect, thank you. So here's a quick look at our implications section. We don't have time to get into this today, but they're all in the back of the report, and we'll also be talking about them in our following panel as well. I want to end the session by turning it over to Gina to speak about what she thinks the implications are for her fellow teens.
Implications for teens. Make sure you double-check generative AI outputs to verify information. Remember the importance of a human connection. Collaborate with your parents, teachers, friends, and more to create the safest experience possible for yourself and your community. And always recognize that AI can't replace professional advice.
Thank you so much for that, Gina. So thank you all so much for your attention. I want to give a big thank you, especially to Gina, for joining me this morning. Can we give her another round of applause?
Thank you.